Few civilizations in history have influenced the modern world as deeply as ancient Rome. Its laws, political systems, military organization, and ideas of citizenship still shape societies today. Yet behind the image of marble temples, disciplined legions, and powerful emperors lies a darker reality. Rome was not destroyed by a single foreign enemy. It was torn apart from the inside. Again and again, Romans turned their swords against fellow Romans. These internal conflicts, known collectively as the Roman Civil Wars, changed the course of history and ultimately ended the Roman Republic. To understand the Roman Civil Wars, one must first understand what Rome was meant to be. For nearly 500 years, Rome was a republic. Power was divided between elected magistrates, the Senate, and popular assemblies. No king ruled Rome. At least, that was the theory. In practice, power belonged to those who controlled wealth, armies, and political alliances. As Rome expanded beyond Italy and conquered the Mediterranean world, its political system failed to evolve at the same pace. Victories brought enormous wealth, millions of slaves, and vast new territories. But they also brought inequality, corruption, and ambition on a scale the old republican system was never designed to handle. The first cracks appeared not on the battlefield, but in the streets of Rome itself. By the 2nd century BCE, Roman society was deeply divided. Wealth flowed into the hands of a small elite, while small farmers lost their land and livelihoods. Veterans returned from war to find their farms ruined or seized by powerful landowners who used slave labor to dominate agriculture. The city of Rome filled with the unemployed poor, dependent on state handouts and political promises. Into this unstable world stepped the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. They were not generals, but reformers. Their goal was to redistribute land to poor citizens and restore balance to Roman society. Their methods, however, challenged the authority of the Senate. Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune of the Tigums of the people in 133 BCE. He proposed land reforms that directly threatened the interests of Rome's most powerful families. When the Senate resisted, Tiberius bypassed tradition and took his proposals directly to the popular assembly. This act shattered political norms. For the first time in centuries, political disagreement turned openly violent. A group of senators and their supporters attacked Tiberius and his followers, killing him in the streets of Rome. His brother Gaius would meet a similar fate a decade later. The deaths of the Gracchi marked a turning point. Political violence had become acceptable. Roman citizens had killed other Roman citizens for power. The door to civil war was now open. The next great transformation came through the army. Originally, Roman soldiers were citizen farmers who served temporarily and then returned home. But constant wars required long-term service. Poor men with no land increasingly filled the ranks. Loyalty shifted from the state to the generals who paid them, rewarded them, and promised land after victory. No one understood this better than Gaius Marius. Marius was a brilliant general and a political outsider who rose to power through military success. He reformed the Roman army, allowing landless citizens to enlist and equipping them at state expense. These reforms made Rome's army more effective than ever before. But they also created a dangerous precedent. Soldiers were now personally loyal to their commanders, not the Republic. Marius' rivalry with another aristocratic general, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, would ignite Rome's first true civil war. The conflict began over command of a lucrative war against King Mithridates of Pontus in the east. The Senate initially granted the command to Sulla, but political maneuvering in Rome transferred it to Marius. Sulla responded in an unprecedented way. In 88 BCE, Sulla marched his legions on Rome itself. This act was unthinkable. No Roman general had ever used his army against the city. Yet Sulla did exactly that, seizing control by force. Rome was no longer governed by laws alone, but by armies. After years of bloody fighting, Sulla emerged victorious. He declared himself dictator, claiming extraordinary powers to restore the Republic. In reality, his rule was marked by terror. Sulla published lists of enemies known as proscriptions. Anyone whose name appeared could be killed without trial, and their property confiscated. Thousands died. Fear ruled Rome. Although Sulla eventually resigned and retired, the damage was done. He had shown future leaders exactly how power could be taken. One of those leaders was a young politician named Julius Caesar. Caesar came from an ancient noble family, but he built his career by appealing to the common people. He formed powerful alliances, most famously the first triumvirate with Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together, they dominated Roman politics. Pompey was Rome's most celebrated general. Crassus was its richest man. Caesar was the rising star who needed military glory to match his rivals. He found it in Gaul. From 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar conquered vast territories in modern-day France and beyond. His victories brought immense wealth and made him beloved by his soldiers. More importantly, he now commanded one of the most loyal armies Rome had ever seen. The Senate, dominated by Pompey's supporters, feared Caesar's growing power. They demanded he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew that doing so would leave him vulnerable to prosecution and political ruin. In 49 BCE, Caesar made a decision that would change history forever. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army. By doing so, Caesar openly declared war on the Roman state. His famous words, "The die is cast," symbolized the point of no return. Rome plunged into another civil war. The conflict between Caesar and Pompey spread across the Mediterranean world. Battles were fought in Italy, Greece, Africa, and Spain. Romang fought Romang on an unprecedented scale. The decisive moment came in 48 BCE at the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar's smaller but more experienced army defeated Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by local rulers hoping to win Caesar's favor. Caesar emerged as the undisputed master of Rome, yet Caesar did not call himself king. Instead, he accumulated titles and powers traditionally held by many different offices. He was named dictator for life. He reformed the calendar, reorganized the government, and centralized authority around himself. To many Romans, Caesar appeared to be restoring order. To others, he was destroying the Republic. Fear grew among the Senate that Caesar intended to become king. The memory of Rome's ancient hatred of monarchy still burned. A group of senators, including Caesar's friend Brutus, decided to act. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death in the Senate chamber. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic. They were wrong. Caesar's assassination did not restore peace. It unleashed the final and most devastating phase of Roman civil war. The vacuum of power left by Caesar's death was filled by three men: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general; Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; and Lepidus, a lesser but influential figure. Together, they formed the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the first, this alliance was legally sanctioned and far more ruthless. Once again, proscriptions were declared. Political enemies were executed en masse. One of the victims was Cicero, Rome's greatest orator and a defender of the Republic. The civil wars resumed with renewed brutality. The forces of the Triumvirate hunted down Caesar's assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Brutus and Cassius were defeated. Both took their own lives. The Republican cause died with them. But unity among the victors did not last. Lepidus was soon sidelined. Power shifted to a rivalry between Mark Antony and Octavian. Antony ruled the eastern provinces and became romantically and politically entangled with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Octavian controlled the West and presented himself as the defender of Roman values against Eastern corruption. The conflict between them was framed not just as a political struggle, but as a cultural one. Octavian portrayed Antony as a traitor enslaved by a foreign queen. The final confrontation came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium. Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra in a decisive naval battle. Both Antony and Cleopatra later took their own lives. Octavian stood alone. Rome was exhausted. Decades of civil war had destroyed entire generations. The Republic, though still spoken of, no longer functioned. Octavian understood what others had failed to realize. Romans hated kings, but they wanted stability more than freedom. He did not call himself king or dictator. Instead, he took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. He claimed to restore the Republic while quietly holding all real power. The Roman Republic was dead. The Roman Empire was born. The Roman civil wars did not end with Caesar's assassination. In many ways, they had only begun. After the Ides of March, Rome plunged into chaos. The conspirators had believed they were saving the Republic, but they had no plan for what came next. The people of Rome did not celebrate Caesar's death. Many mourned him. Caesar had been generous, charismatic, and popular with the masses. His funeral became a political explosion. Mark Antony's speech, delivered over Caesar's blood-stained body, ignited fury across the city. Crowds rioted. The assassins fled Rome. Into this chaos stepped a young man almost no one had taken seriously. Gaius Octavius, later known as Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. He was only 18 years old, physically unimposing, and politically inexperienced. Yet he possessed two things that mattered more than armies or age: Caesar's name and his fortune. Octavian returned to Italy and claimed his inheritance. At first, Mark Antony underestimated him. Antony believed himself a natural successor to Caesar's power. But Octavian was patient, calculating, and ruthless beneath his calm exterior. He aligned himself with Caesar's veterans, winning their loyalty through money and symbolism. Slowly, he began to build power. Rome now fractured into factions once again. On one side stood Antony and his allies. On the other were Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, who had fled east and were raising armies in the provinces. Caught between them was Octavian, who played both sides while strengthening his own position. In 43 BCE, Rome descended into another civil war. Octavian marched on Rome itself, forcing the Senate to recognize him as consul. Soon after, he formed an uneasy alliance with Mark Antony and Lepidus. This alliance became known as the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the First Triumvirate, this one was legal, officially sanctioned, and far more brutal. The Second Triumvirate began with terror. To eliminate enemies and raise funds, they instituted proscription state-sanctioned death lists. Anyone named could be killed without trial. Their property was confiscated. Hundreds died. One of the most famous victims was Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, whose head and hands were displayed in the Forum as a warning. The triumvirs then turned their attention to Caesar's murderers. In 42 BCE, their armies met Brutus and Cassius in Greece at the Battle of Philippi. The fighting was savage and decisive. One by one, the Republican leaders were defeated. Brutus and Cassius committed suicide. The Republic, in any meaningful sense, died with them. In 27 BCE, Octavian declared that he was restoring the Republic. He returned power to the Senate and people. In return, the Senate granted him extraordinary honors and titles. He became Augustus, meaning the revered one. He retained control of the armies and key provinces. In reality, nothing had changed. Rome was now an empire. The civil wars had ended, but at an immense cost. For nearly a century, Rome had been consumed by internal violence. Entire generations had known nothing but war. The old republican system, designed for a city-state, could not govern a Mediterranean empire. The Roman civil wars were not caused by a single man or moment. They were the result of deep structural failures, inequality, ambition, militarization, and political paralysis. Strong individuals exploited weak institutions. Armies replaced laws. Loyalty shifted from the state to commanders. The Republic collapsed not because Romans abandoned it, but because it could no longer function in the world Rome had created. Augustus brought peace, stability, and prosperity. But it was the peace of control, not freedom. The Senate remained, elections continued, and tradition survived, but real power belonged to one man. The Roman civil wars reshaped history. They ended the Roman Republic and created the Roman Empire, a system that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. They offered a timeless warning about what happens when ambition outpaces institutions, when violence becomes political currency, and when a state grows beyond its own foundations. Rome did not fall to foreign enemies in its greatest crisis. It tore itself apart from within. And in that destruction, a new world was born.